Good morning, juniors. We are going to try to finish up chapter 24 today. I'm not sure we're going to get through it because it is a lot of material, but let's see how much we can get done today. Okay, so yesterday we left off with the election of Richard Nixon. We had talked about 1968 being such a critical year in American history. Johnson steps out of running for re-election. Several different candidates are in the mix there. We talked about George Wallace. We talked about Nixon. We talked about the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, one of the other candidates for the election. Okay, that is now behind us. Richard Nixon is president. And he appealed to this great silent majority of Americans who he believed were quiet, decent, respectable, hardworking people, and they just wanted to continue living an a relatively easy life. He claimed that he represented them. Okay, so we have a lot of notes today. I hope you've gotten them off of the website first instead of trying to take them now. Other than that, you got a pause button. Okay, so one of the first things that Nixon hits hard as president is the issue of busing and the segregation of public schools. The problem with busing was that, of course, this is going to be a highly emotional and controversial topic. We all know that it's going to be. But what happened was, and we know this today because this is the way it still is, you have basically in many areas white neighborhoods and black neighborhoods. Where we live is not necessarily as much like that. I know my neighborhood is very ethnically diverse, okay? But several of your neighborhoods are probably the same way. But in this day and time, and I do remember this because fortunately I was alive during Nixon's presidency, but I was not in school yet, okay? Remember that. Anyway, I moved south in the mid 70s, mid to late 70s, and I remember going to school when it was desegregated, meaning they were busing kids in. So my second grade class was very mixed, which I was used to because I had been to a private school that was ethnically mixed in New Jersey. Not a problem. It's normal. But then the next year, my class suddenly became all white. When did that happen? But that was the way it was. They stopped busing that year, and that was in the late 70s. So anyway, back to what Nixon was doing. He had the courts order speeding up this desegregation of public schools by forcing busing, moving kids from the black neighborhood to the white school and moving kids from the white neighborhood to the black school, and just trying to keep the schools desegregated and reflect the ethnic mix of the entire community. Of course, this is going to have many parents up in arms, and in some places like in Michigan, they actually resorted to pipe bombs on empty school buses. So it was a big issue. He also had some growing economic problems because Johnson had tried to pay for his entire program, his Great Society, without raising taxes. We have this growing deficit in our economy, and we have really pretty bad inflation at this point, meaning that the prices are going up for just stuff that everybody has to buy. So he tried to trim the federal budget and tried to, shrink how much money the government was spending and raise the interest rates just a little bit and see if that would help. But when he did that, unemployment started to rise. So he comes up with this new economic policy, which is an interesting name why he would call it that, because that's exactly what Stalin called his. And I don't think he would want to be put in the same boat as Stalin. Anyway, in the new economic policy, he froze wages and prices. You cannot change the wages of a person. You cannot change the price of a gallon of milk or anything else without permission from the federal government. And for 90 days, they were not going to change at all. It didn't work. Okay. it's not going to work. But we'll come back to that as we continue in his presidency. Let's talk about his one great success, although it too is now looked on as questionable. He did establish a relationship with communist China. We had been only recognizing nationalist China, which was the island of Taiwan, as the correct government of China. But Nixon actually visited. He was the first president to do so. He visited communist China, and he supported their admission to the United Nations. He did not abandon Taiwan in doing so. But ultimately, the UN will abandon Taiwan. They will kick Taiwan out of the UN in order to admit, in fact, that's on the next slide. They will kick Taiwan out of the UN in order to admit Communist China in 1971. And then 1978, President Carter will formally end all ties with nationalist China. Today, nationalist China does not exist anymore. Taiwan is now part of communist China, although they still maintain their own government. Okay. All right, so let's talk about, he's having some success in foreign relations, okay? So he also is going to have some success in dealing with the Soviet Union. He has a Secretary of State that's probably one of the best Secretaries of State of all time, and his name was Henry Kissinger. He helped us get to a state of détente, which is that easing of relations. We're no longer at the Cold War where we're standing there getting ready to fight each other. We're just like, okay, there's an ease in that tension. It's not quite so bad. Maybe we're going to get along here. And they even start talks, the strategic arms limitation talks, which will lead to SALT treaties, strategic arms limitation treaties 1 and 2. He even starts selling grain to the Soviet Union. There were people there that were starving, and we needed to sell them grain in order to help out the people that were starving. Okay, let's go back to Vietnam for just a minute. When we left off there, the American media was causing problems here in the United States, making people in the United States want to withdraw from the war. And so the whole thing was getting bad. So Nixon is going to try to de-escalate the war and expand it at the same time. I know, I was confused too, but bear with me just a minute and I've got it figured out, okay? He's de-escalating. He's pulling American troops out and replacing those American troops with letting the South Vietnamese fight their own battle, okay? Doing that. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Well, history has not been kind to Nixon, okay? It looks like it was a bad thing. And ultimately, I'll tell you why I might agree with that. Although the jury's still out as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so he's pulling American troops out. But in the same time, he's okaying raids into the neighboring countries of Laos and Cambodia and allowing massive bombings and blockadings of North Vietnam. So it's like he's trying to win the war with the South Vietnamese troops instead of with American troops. Not sure if that was what he was trying to do or what, but we're going to have some problems come up starting in 1968 that are going to lead to more problems in Vietnam, and ultimately a solution. Okay, so 3 things under dissent at home. You see those 3 little slash marks. Those are 3 different things that happen to contribute to poor feelings in the United States as a whole about what's going on in Vietnam. Okay, and they are, first of all, the court-martial of Lieutenant William Cowley. He was determined to be responsible for the My Lai massacre. Your book says it's pronounced My Lai. I'm not sure. Maybe Tom can help us. Or Alex. I don't know. Either one. But I've always pronounced it My Lai. This was a group of American troops that walked into a village and apparently killed more than 300 unarmed citizens in the village because they were angry and they had been attacked by the Viet Cong, and they thought that those people were helping the Viet Cong. Remember, those are the ones in South Vietnam that are helping the North Vietnamese communist forces. Okay, so he's court-martialed. Ultimately, he's not pardoned, but his sentence is reduced enough that he wasn't fully to blame, I guess. But he is court-martialed and found guilty of murder. The second thing is at Kent State, which is a university near Cleveland, Ohio, there were shootings. There were students protesting on the grounds of the university, and the protest got so bad that the Ohio governor calls in the National Guard to put it down. The National Guard troops got spooked, I guess is a good way to say it, and they started firing and ended up killing 4 students, 2 of which were completely innocent and had not even, they were walking to class, had not taken part in the demonstration. So this, of course, is going to reveal more deep division in the United States over this issue of the Vietnam War. The third thing was the publication in 1971 of the Pentagon Papers. A Pentagon staff member, Daniel Ellsberg, stole these documents, the Pentagon Papers, out of the Pentagon and released them to the New York Times, and the New York Times published them. And they were not like top secret type documents, although Nixon tried to say they were and that they shouldn't have been released. But they did reveal blunders and mistakes that the president and his staff, Nixon and Johnson, had made in trying to accomplish what they wanted to in the war. Things like that the Gulf of Tonkin resolution had been written well ahead of the attack. So it was really weird, and it's, kind of the media drumming up difficulty. And each of these events is going to increase that anti-war sentiment and make things more difficult here at home. Okay, so we'll try to get on. All right, so North Vietnam is being worn down, but they are nowhere near ready to quit. But finally, we do reach an agreement in the Paris Peace Accords in early of 1973 for the United States to pull our troops out of Vietnam and allow the South Vietnamese to rule themselves, supposedly. We left them with lots of guns, lots of arms. We left them, as much as we could. And North Vietnam supposedly turned over most of our prisoners of war, although there are still many men that are missing in action from Vietnam. So we're pulling out of Vietnam, right? Well, by the spring of 1975, North Vietnam takes over the entire country, and the entire country becomes communist Vietnam. So this does partially prove that domino theory of Eisenhower's, that if one nation starts to fall, then the others will follow quickly, because Laos and Cambodia are also going to fall to communist regimes. I am not going to get through. So there's where I'm going to stop, and I will do one more brief video tomorrow or tonight to finish up this chapter. Okay? Have a good day.